Welcome to Banking and Finance TV from Brussels today. As the European nations, heads of government are gathering for a summit, I have my very own summit with Prof Dr Sylvester Eijffinger, Professor of Financial Economics at Tilburg University. And I invited you to have a chat with me about really European financial supervision. We're talking a lot about financial supervision, macro-prudential supervision. Systemic risk is a major component. Can you briefly explain that to us?
Yeah. Systemic risk, well, we have seen that in the crisis. Systemic risk is risk to the financial stability. And that's a broad term for, risk to a collapse of the system as such. Now, then what you see is with financial stability, it's so major that there is a clear definition of what you define as systemic risk. Now, there are very intelligent people all over the world who write papers, articles about it. And what you see is that they all have a different concept of systemic risk.
Hence my question.
Yes, yes. So that means that it's very difficult. We know what the animal looks like, but it's very difficult to describe this animal. And what you see is that some people, like Luigi Singales, says that it can be measured by the CDS prices, credit default swaps prices. But if you use that, for example, what do you see? You see that these prices will change if you try to have a policy, focused on CDS prices. So it's very simple to say ex post what it means, but it's very difficult to define it ex ante.
Yeah.
And that's the major problem.
Yeah, and it's also really, as I understand it, it's very much to do with compounded risks that really hurt the economy as a whole.
Yes.
And by their very nature, therefore, unforeseeable almost.
Exactly.
So what are early warning indicators that one could look for?
Well, CDS prices, for example, but also, for example...
Because you speak about asset bubbles.
Asset bubbles, that's also a possibility to look at that. But what you see is that the prices of financial assets are very hard to measure, in the sense that you see always that there is interaction between the macro and the finance components. So we can say also exposed when there is a bubble, but it's very hard to detect the bubble when you are in it and when there is a start of the bubble. So what you see is that for central bankers and financial supervisors, it's very hard to say we are now in the bubble and we have to burst the bubble.
And we have to burst the bubble. Well, we'll come to that in a minute. But if you then look at Europe, of course, it's an agglomerate with many, many different countries who all have their own systems, who all have their own data. How can you ever get your hands on clean data to come to a real good understanding of risk?
Yeah, no, that's, Connie, that's very difficult. And why is it so difficult? Because we have never experienced a kind of policy supervising systemic risk in the macro-prudential terms. That means that we have to be very pragmatic, in my opinion. We have to look to all kinds of indicators, CDS prices, other prices, where we say, well, we have a very pragmatic view on measuring systemic risk. And that means that you see it, what economists like to call it, a signal extraction problem.
Yeah.
So you take all the indicators and you say, okay, let's look how we can measure all kinds of events, not only fat tails, but also other indicators which we have never looked to.
No.
And then in this process, which is a kind of, Bayesian updating process, you see that you learn by doing and detecting systemic risk.
Yeah, but then I see your point. But then we are Europe. I'll take you back to sort of my pragmatic as an outsider view. Then there's Europe. Then you have all this data. Somebody needs to interpret it.
Yeah.
It needs to be organized. Who gets the skill and who gets the ability to interpret it? But more importantly, who then takes action?
Well,
How is that
a very
structured?
interesting. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. You know, of course, that our sharer group made some proposals. The European Commission added to that, and now we have decided how to do European financial supervision. Now, if you look to the macro-prudential supervision, that's done by the European Systemic Risk Board. Now, the European Systemic Risk Board is overlapping with the General Counsel of the European Central Bank. So, and they have the provision of the liquidity instrument, so because the ECB determines interest rates. I see no major problem except that they have a problem when to detect systemic risk. But they have the instruments, they have the authority, they have, I think, already quite some expertise. So macroprudential supervision is not so much a problem
as the micro.
As the microprudential. And the microprudential supervision, to be honest, is still a mess. Why is it still a mess? We have these three committees, SEPS, CISA, CEOPS. These committees will be upgraded to colleges, but still, suppose that you have an international operating bank, then you have maybe 40, 42, 45 supervisors, national supervisors.
Well,
so you can fill the whole room.
The room with supervisors
and
who all look at each other and nobody takes action.
Nobody takes action. Because
you know the saying, a child drowns when there's 6 parents by the pool.
Exactly. Now, there are now 42 or 45 parents with the pool, at the pool. And that means that at that moment, nobody is responsible.
No, that's the problem.
And so the lead supervisor is a major thing. Who should be the lead supervisor? Very simple. The central bank / financial supervisor, who is where the headquarters of
that institution
for
is
ING, for example, you would say the Netherlands Bank. For Santander, you would say the Banco de España. BNP Paribas, you would say the Banque de France. Very simple. You can organize that. But then the second problem, and that's also not solved, is who pays the bill? The burden sharing.
Yeah, the burden sharing.
So the ministers of finance from Britain and Germany were not prepared to give that authority to a European level. Now, if you are not prepared to do that, then you have a real problem. Because you now have the memorandum of understanding. Now,
well, we know we have some way to go in making a union also a truly committed political joint union.
Yeah, but I suppose that there is a new crisis necessary to
get us to that level of understanding. Exactly. A final brief question, Mr. Eijffinger, because it's a burning question. We're now in a crisis, so everybody's very aware and alert and looking around. Yeah. But you know very well that really the moment to prevent a crisis is before it happens. So my question to you is, who will stop the band when the music's still playing?
Now, that's an interesting question because it has to do with the party. And there is a very nice expression by one of the predecessors of Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve System. It's a task for the central bank to take the punch bowl away when the party is still going.
Still going.
Now what we see, and Ben Bernanke knows this, that the party is still going, everybody gets drunk, and everybody gets too much liquor, and we know that that's not good. So if the Federal Reserve System or the Bank of England, who did a lot of quantitative easing, so the balance sheet of the Fed is blown up to triple, quadruple. You see that somebody has to stop
the music. And you still believe very much that's the role of the central bank?
It's the role of the central bank, but do explain it to politicians, because they say, what are you doing?
Things are going swimmingly fine.
Exactly, exactly. Why are you hurting the economy so much? And that's a very difficult role for the central bank to play because it's the task for the central bank to say no to politicians. That makes a central bank independent.
That makes a central banker a central banker.
Exactly.
Mr. Eijffinger, thank you very much. And as I can gather, we have much more food for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.